Night falls, and the magic of words is burning firefly-like in the darkness. I'm the gargoyle, your host for this evening session. It's a slightly damaged gargoyle tonight. Dumb fuck here slammed his thumb in a car door, and it's hurting like a mother bitch. So bear with me, please. Coming up in the darkness, I will be reading the work of Peace Moray. So sit back and enjoy. And as always, the focus is on the words, never on the person behind the camera. And if you like this video, please consider subscribing, ringing that bell, and commenting below. I am the gargoyle, your reader on the ledge. The Sons of Ehll, Chapter 1. The sons of Ehll were standing near the fleet of cars, their eyes fixed south to the old cemetery of Ehll. The fire before them was still roaring at its peak, crackling and popping, consuming what was left of the lonely tree. But none of them cared about the fire anymore. Young and old, the sons of Ehll were quiet. None of them even moved for a moment. They were listening to the dying cry. They were watching the two heavy pit bull terriers sprint to disappear through the trees. But then, when the cry stopped, some covered their mouths with their hands. Some even clasped them over their heads. Some crossed their arms. When some clasped them behind their bodies. Many of them were swallowing hard, their eyes twinkling, when only one was smiling. This large, particular fellow was standing at the back, near a green Ford F-100 truck. He had an M15 pistol on his hip, and his chest was pushed out like a confident man. This was a military man, and it could be seen with his attire. He was wearing a perfectly pressed white shirt, which was tucked in the navy trousers, and the arms of the shirt were neatly folded up, and it was clear that a diamond was dear to the country he had fought for, because a diamond-shaped pin held the thick navy tie in place, and an embroidery of a diamond dripping with blood was on the side of the navy kepi, which sat on the man's bald head, as if though the night was still young. But clean as he was, smart dressed as he was, it would be known from the first look of him that he was a man who had been through hell, and probably in the wars he had fought in. He had a navy patch covering his left eye. His big nose was an old fruit, and the left side of his old hideous face was wrinkled with burns. There was no trace of hair on his face. He religiously shaved himself every morning, it was known. And even when the smile was small, the burned side of his face stretched more than it should have, showing even the man's dark gums. The smile shared a tale. Only he knew what would happen in the cemetery. Chapter 2. The pit bulls were both the color of wet coals, with muzzles the color of wet mud. They weighed the same pounds, and it would be impossible to tell them apart if not for their collars. One was wearing a blue collar, and one was wearing a red collar. Side by side, the dogs entered the old cemetery of Ehll with a speed that was impressive for the pounds they carried. These were terrible beasts, and now they've been released for a hunt. They were led by their noses, which had never disappointed. The dogs were gnashing their teeth and snarling. They were near. They could taste the char, and they could smell the blood. Ah, juicy, they said. Juicy, fresh blood. They also had their ears up, listening deeply, as they always did, listening deeply for any threat. There was no threat. The breeze was whistling against their ears. Dry leaves from previous falls were breaking under their paws, and the fire was still crackling and popping behind them. The cemetery was ghost quiet, however, with not even insects chirping away. That was odd, but that didn't matter, because then a painful quiet sob called them ahead. The sob excited their senses, and the dogs charged forward. It won't be long now before they had their feast, and a glorious feast it would be. Their noses never lied. The heavy pit bulls ran past the last of the lime trees that cast beautiful shadows on the path, and then through two large tombstones a distant away. Towards the right, they saw the meat lying over a grave. It weighed 160 pounds by the look, and it was dark from the fire, and a deliciously charred scented smoke was dancing over it. It was still moving, it seemed. Well, their fangs could kill, and killing was the best part. Ah, juicy, they said again, drooling. Juicy, fresh blood. They were never starved. Their father took good care of them, but it wasn't every day that they were given a feast of this size. Tonight they would feast, puke and shit all over the cemetery, keep themselves hydrated by drinking the blood, and feast again until there was not even a bone left. They would feast until the sun went up, and this reverie pushed them to charge once more. And they were growling this time, ready to tear juicy flesh and break white bones with their fangs. It would be a glorious feast, indeed. They leaped over graves, a first for the pit bulls, but nonetheless impressive leaps for dogs of this size. They'd fly up in the air and land together as if they were in the finals of cute doggy championships. After each leap, they'd come down with all their weight, and the earth would feel their strength. The earth would feel their hunger. They couldn't wait to get there. But then as the pit bulls got closer to the two large tombstones, as there were only a few leaps from their reward, came another scent. This scent was sweet, and it pushed them from the right, away from the sizzling meat. Ah, juicy meat. And at first they both tried ignoring this new scent, since it distracted them. But the scent quickly overpowered their sensitive noses. It was burning their nostrils like a poisonous chemical. They whined a bit, complaining about the cruelty of the world and the unnatural things that lived in the cemetery. Now they were no longer charging. There was no way they would still be charging after the assault. They were only trotting. Their heads were cocked and looking to the right, where the unpleasantly sweet scent was coming from. Their trotting, however, was still pushing them to the deliciously charred scent. Ah, fresh meat, sizzling meat, darky meat. No, too sweet, unnatural. The black pit bulls with brown muzzles didn't like this sweetness clearly, and it made them sneeze, the sneeze hitting them at the same time. This scent was growing unpleasantly stronger, and the dogs finally stopped, baring their fangs in a nasty snarl. Their brown noses were leaking drops of clear bubbling mucus. They sneezed again, thrice, and then looked on with their dark pupils dilating, their eyes and their ears and their noses, trying to understand the source of this pain before they faced an unexpected death. The noses caught nothing but the sweetness. The ears caught nothing but the ghost silence. But the eyes caught the dark figure. The figure was far away, between two of the tall trees, lining to mark the borders of the cemetery. It was trying to hide them by using the thick trees. It seemed, but the pit bulls could not be sure. There was, of course, still a chance that the poisonous chemical was causing them to hallucinate. But if this was real, then all the sweetness of the scent and the hiding of the dark figure might be some kind of nasty trap, they told themselves, and whined once more, with more of the clear babbling mucus now dropping onto the ground. Nasty figure! Yes, nasty, trickster, witch! The figure was of a human, as far as the pit bulls could tell anyway, but it neither felt nor smelled all right. It neither felt nor smelled like human, or any of the animals they had killed in the past. The unknown was a threat to them, they decided, and began to growl like the mad beasts that they were, dropping their muzzles as they prepared to charge in the direction of the dark figure. Strike first and ask questions later. That was their strategy in dogfights. But then some fog lifted from near the two trees. 2 raindrops hit the pit bulls, and this took them aback a moment. It was going to be a horrible fight, it was clear. But like their father, the pit bulls never left any work unfinished. In their preparation, however, for the most horrible fight they could ever be in, the figure peeked through the trees, and with the light of the full moon, its smooth face was like polished marble, its eyes reflecting a frightening red. Death. The men. Ehll was a small town in the northwest of Chauvel-de-Chalais in Mondianderland. Sorry for the pronunciation there. The ground was green and the air refreshing. She boasted a population of almost 20,000 souls, and almost every soul loved her, regardless of her dark past. Or perhaps because of her dark past, they would even bleed for Ehll if it was needed. And only a few of her children would leave and not return for a quiet break. She provided a simple life, you see, where many sons would own the same tie and many daughters would own the same dress. But still, the town was not too small that it would need only one church. However, it was small enough to function well with only one set of traffic lights, which were at the intersection of West-Illest Road, a road that ran all the way from the beginning of West to the end of East, and South and North Road, a road that ran all the way from the beginning of South to the end of North. And the two roads were used to unofficially split Ehll into 4 parts, which were then named after the directions they lay in, with reference to the intersection. There was northeast, northwest, southwest, and southeast. And the residents seems to love the fact that the only way in and out of Ehll was with the river road, a road that was longer than both west-east and south-north. This road ran through the eastern side of the small town. However, with the town surrounded by hills that peaked at the height of 879 feet, this is where trends went to die. She hardly failed to make visitors question if they'd gone back in time. She was loved, this was true, and the visitors would return again, and again in years that followed, with some even moving in. There was always laughter in Ehll, even when it was the 70s, and many of her sons had died in the Vietnam War. Some of the laughter would sing from Avy's Bar, a bar that most men, and from all 4 parts of Ehll, frequented by River Road. They frequented the dimly lit bar to be merry with fellow men, and leave women back home to take care of the young. Avie was a good friend to them all, in happy times and in sad times. He'd allow them to drink for free. Well, not so much since Louis arrived. Besides, the man had the cheapest beer and the cheapest brandy in town, as it had been reported by the Heat Map magazine many years ago. This particular article about the bar was the first of many, and it was hung behind Avie at the counter, with the 6 other following articles hung on the left, 3 on either side of the fireplace. It was well known in the whole Chevals de Chalet that Avie's profits from the drinks were not enough to keep the bar running, even when it worked in his favor that he only offered 1 brand of beer and 1 brand of brandy, but that he actually made his money when the men bought something to eat, and his cheap beer and warm stew was well known even to the truck drivers who would go by. And as it had been expected, almost all the bars in Ehll started serving food as a way to keep the little number of customers they still had. But also, as it had been expected, they never got it right, which resulted into many of them shutting down. They didn't have Avie's stew, or rather his grandmother's stew. The old lady, who had passed on while Avie was still in his mother's womb, had given her daughter the recipe, who then passed it on to all her children. Now there were only 3 people in Ehll who knew how to cook it, and they were Avie, his wife Emily, and then Louis. But Avie never told his wife about Louis, fearing that the woman might get jealous. The old lady's recipe had been great and all, and it had served him well, but Avie had tinkered it with throughout the years. He added fresh peas and fresh carrots, among some herbs that Louis's mother had used for her beef many suppers ago. Louis herself later added balls of fresh bread to give the stew some soft texture, and also to make the stew appear as if it had more of the meat than the veggies. It was true that her trick was the reason the bar was always making so much money as it did, and the customers would also praise the texture that was brought by the balls of fresh bread. And now, all the men from different homes and different eras would buy the stew at least thrice a week. They loved it here, and by just looking around the crowd, it would be easy to see that Avie's bar was a home to all. It was a home to friendly men like Pastor Osman, and to unsociable men like Madman Bella, and it was a home to people of the law like Sheriff Holland, and to questionable folks like Toothless Buster. It was a home to lazy scums like Roo Peckman, and to busy men like Rafferty Levin. And that is all for this evening. Thank you so much for joining us. Coming up next week, we have the work of Paul Brown. I do hope you join us. Thank you so much for tuning in. And as always, I am the Gargoyle, your reader with a damaged thumb on the ledge.